down to loot him, so I don't have to.
See, now he wants to bring old Alistair in. I'm trying to catch us making fun of everybody. That's all right, because you know what, Jim? If we do make fun of people, there's chances that we will offend them, so they may not want to listen.
I haven't gotten any complaints yet about offending anyone or my use of strong language, but I'm holding out. I'm hoping one day I'll open that inbox.
I think for us to offend other people other than that are being recorded at the time have to listen to the podcast.
Yeah, that was my next question. How many people have you had say that they listen to the podcast? Well, I haven't had any yet, but I'm hopeful.
It's kind of bless you. I had someone sneeze here. It's kind of weird when someone says to you like, "Oh, I listened to your podcast," and you're like, "Oh, you've heard the things I've said."
Oh no, not at all.
I saw your face today. I don't. What do I do with that?
But I'm Jim from Knights of the Braille. With me is the wonderful, wonderful Richard.
Oh, lies and fake news. Trust Jim to do that.
With us is the magnificent Matthew, aka Blind Fury, who's come back. He's willingly come back.
Yeah, I'm starting to wonder about his sanity, so we may need to check him in and get him checked out. Definitely after the second time.
You guys are less abusive than my home life. If you have 3 cats, you know what I mean.
Just give it time.
So we need to up our game. I
agree. We need to pour his rug pee on the carpet.
I mean, I didn't intend that as a contest, but if it is, you're losing. So yeah.
That's okay, because I'm used to being a loser. I'm kind of like Beck. I'm the one they wrote that song about.
So, how are you doing, Matthew, at the moment during this pandemic, during lockdown?
I'm pretty good. Yeah, I've had my first shot towards the vaccine, and I've been working from home for the last year anyway. So, that saved commute time has largely gone towards reading books and gaming.
That's awesome, man. That's at least you're looking on the positive side of things, you know.
There's lots of negative in the world. I can find all of it, but try to keep myself try to take advantage of all the downtime I've had.
Right. Why be negative whenever you can actually, be positive about things?
I'm not a pessimist. I'm just an optimist for the worst in life. That's all.
Okay, see, I don't understand big words, so why be bad when you can be good? Let's keep it Southern, simple.
Just a quick announcement for everyone. Richard plays dumb in this podcast, but he's smarter than everyone in the room.
Considering I'm the only one in my room, I'm kind of curious about that statement.
I mean, that you're not fooling me, Richard. I grew up for most of my life down south, and there's some very smart people with some very thick accents.
Yeah, but those are not my family. I know enough to be dangerous. I will be honest. I know enough to be dangerous.
I've seen those southern family trees. It's just a straight line, man. It's like a fucking freeway.
I mean, that's better than an inward spiral, I guess.
Well, Jim loves my southernisms, and here's you one that will offend some southerners, I'm sure, because it's true. If you can't keep it in your pants, keep it in your family.
So anyway, before we go completely off the rails, Richard, how are you doing? Oh, have I lost you?
No, not me. I'm still here.
How are you doing, Richard? You had some stitches out the other week. You've had your COVID jabs. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. Arms not sore anymore. It will be like in a week and a half, 2 weeks on April the 7th. And then I go back April the 8th for the 1 month checkup after they did remove the stitches. They had given me the choice of choosing, would you like to come back in 3 weeks? Or I said 4 weeks. I don't want to come back here any more than I have to. I mean, I like y'all and all, but no, I'm good. But other than that, man, feeling good. Just been editing documents and all. Going through another wrestling RPG today, and I'm about halfway through with it. So it's going good. Got the KWF set up. Just wait.
Yeah, tell us a bit about the KWF. How you're hoping to?
Yeah.
What you're looking to do? Yeah, he's got the wrestling promo voice going.
Well, it's going to be a play-by-post. It's going to be a trial because I've never done play-by-post, and I have done fantasy wrestling in the past. So, I'm going to try to base it off of it, along with both the squared circle and the worldwide wrestling. And yes, I did say that very slowly because of my accent. I would have tripped over it. Uh, so I'm going to try to combine like all three, see which works. It's going to be probably a little rough go for the first 3-4 shows until I find the rhythm and find out what works. But hopefully, people start signing up for it, and we can get some wrestlers created and get the card put up there on the on the Discord. Because right now it's just 2 wrestlers that are fighting each other in 6 different matches. So I'm sure they'll get tired.
I'm down, man. I'm already practicing saying jabroni. I'm ready. But Matt, do you have any experience or advice for Richard with play-by-posts?
Well, actually, I do have some advice for Richard because I did listen to your last podcast, and I want to correct I believe, a misassumption he has made. Allow me to explain. Hey, Google, pick a number between 1 and 100.
Here's a random number, 47.
Ooh.
Thank you.
Here's a random number, 47.
So that's how you do a D100 on the Google Assistant.
Excellent.
I don't use the Google Assistant.
Yeah, but last time you had said that you can't tell it to roll a D100, which is true, but you can ask it to pick a random number in between a certain range.
Right.
Oh, that's fantastic.
So, and all of them will do that. They don't care whether, it's still treating it as a die roll because they make the die rolling sound for a random number pick. Just a quick check.
The more you know.
Yeah. Speaking as someone who's...
I'm typing this down real quick. Oh, congratulations, Matthew. That is the 3,975th time that I have been wrong in the past week.
So Matt, play-by-post.
Yeah. So I've had mixed results with play-by-post games. Part of it's because I've usually gone through third-party websites like RPOL, and my experience has been that if you don't have a strong connection to your players, you need to get the players vested, and you need to get them on to commit early, so that you don't end up with... I start out, I make a character, we all start talking, and then 4 days later, or like a week or 2 later, everybody just sort of disappears.
Right.
Because you're dealing with a long-term time commitment. You're going for the marathon as opposed to the 50-yard dash.
Right.
And I have the when you do that, it's best to make the transactions quick and clean. So if someone wants to write more, they can. But to give them the least amount of obligation, because as soon as it becomes work, people stop doing it, and then if people stop posting, you don't have a game anymore.
Right, and that's what I'm hoping. Like with the fact that it's actually wrestling, it will be a lot of back and forth. I'm just hoping that people will actually get on the Discord and post. That's probably my main concern right now.
Have you run a test game to see roughly how many moves it would take to complete a match?
Both of them seem to be a little different, so therefore, again, it's going to be like me finding what seems to work. Right now, my thought process is going to be like they roll a 6-sided die to determine who wins initiative. And I'm thinking like the same die roll will be how many moves they get before they roll for initiative again. Not really sure.
Yeah.
So Serious question, Richard. If you're doing it like this, like, are you playing it as an actual skill-based wrestling game, or are you playing it as sort of like a soap opera where it's more like a bard who's performing in a very physical manner?
Well, the squared circle, which is the original one that I purchased, is the stat based or skill based.
Okay.
And the
So we're assuming that they're actually wrestling, not just putting on a scripted.
And combine it with the worldwide wrestling. Then I'm going to definitely change the name of, because God Almighty, I can't say that quick. Where it is based, because I want the skills and stats and all to actually mean something, if that makes sense.
If you're looking for reading material on something like this, there's I can't remember. I think it's by Andrew Seipel is the author. Wrote a series. It's not his first series, which is Threadbare, but in the same universe. It's about a little halfling. And one of the characters in it is a performance style, basically a wrestler who wanted to do magic and could never figure it out, and calls himself the Muscle Wizard. But very similar, interesting, like theatrical performances and all sorts of interesting ways to integrate it.
Okay, I'm definitely going to be looking that up while Jim runs his mouth for a little bit. You know,
it's on Audible.
That Matt brought up last time he was on, a lesson we learned about the time you invest against the enjoyment you get out of a game, which was why I was asking about the length of a match potentially. But it brings up a really good point now about throwing it into a fantasy universe could bring in some interesting, things to throw in there to make it more exciting or different. But I mean, maybe it's good to start with a traditional wrestling setup and then grow it from there.
that's like I said, that's what I'm gonna try to do, is combine them both and see. And like I said, it's gonna be rough, so it's gonna be a lot of editing and seeing what works best for this type of environment.
Yeah, I remember I wrestled in high school, and I had friends at the time who watched a lot of the WWF, and it was always interesting to me to hear them talk about how some of these moves were unbreakable or super interesting. I'm like, so that's not legal. That would kill someone. That would be. I don't. I mean, like an actual scholastic wrestling match is super. Like it's very fast paced, but it's a power and skill based game or experience. It's more like a boxing match, I guess. I would can. And like, I'm not knocking. Like, I enjoy good. Like the whole worldwide wrestling thing is really interesting to me. But I always viewed it more as like a performance, physical performance. In which case, they had the costumes and everything else, which I always enjoyed.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the wrestlers was IRS, the guy in suspenders who would go in and was like the federal auditor who would go in and wrestle with people.
Erwin R. Shyster.
That's right.
Yeah.
I thought that was amazing.
Erwin R. Shyster. WCW.
That's right.
Oh yes, believe me, I know my wrestling stuff.
So would this universe be the soap opera dramatics of wrestling are real, or are those still presented as a performance, or are you unsure of how you want to approach that and just test out and see what works, Rich?
Well, the WWW is, in the rulebook, the parts I've come across so far, it talks about like the wrestlers, and I use that in quotation, are stage, and they're talking about what they're going to do, that they already know the outcome. And while I know that happens in sports entertainment, because it's not wrestling, I really want it for the players not to know, because if you don't know, I don't see them really putting forth the effort to play. I mean, because I honestly wouldn't, so I'm gonna try to have the soap opera aspect of it to an extent, but for it actually to be real enough for it to mean something.
Yeah, that could could be an interesting economy of setting up what you want to happen in the match and then rolling to see if you can do it. And, things going wrong, knocking someone out by accident or failing a move. But that would require additional planning. And as Matt said, you don't want people to have to invest too much beforehand, otherwise you could lose them. So I get what you're saying. You want to run it as a dramatic soap opera and just see what happens as it goes, right?
I mean, yeah, because honestly, everybody knows who Kane is, but he was also Glenn Jacobs, and they say that, he was horribly burned in the fire. Well, not really, because he was Dr. Isaac Yankem before he became Kane, who was horribly burned. So people know it's not real. I'm not going to do like unrealistic things like that, but to actually have something mean something, I think, is going to be the way that I'm going to try to go.
As long as I can be pallbearer, I don't care.
I guess it really depends on like what you want out of the experience too, because I can see a world in which the entire game has nothing to do with the actual wrestling matches, and it's all about maneuvering between your manager and the league management and the other players, and you're sitting there and you're trying to buy off your opponents or get dirt on them, and the whole purpose is so that the end result is scripted, but you're, instead of rolling for skill, you're rolling for crowd pleasing, and you have to write out what actually happens in the match to get to that end result. And depending on how well you do or don't do, you can get more sponsors or more fame or more followers or something like that.
Right.
I mean, it's a very different kind of game than you're proposing. Involves a lot more role play probably than technical dice rolling. It also probably involves a lot of commitment on the player's part, or it's not going to be nearly as interesting.
And like I said, it all depends on how active they are. You know, and this is me not having read through the entire book of WWW as of yet, because my main focus right now is editing it for Nathan. So when I go back and reread it, like for my own personal knowledge, it may change some of the ways that I look at the aspects of what I want to run or how I want it to be. The combination of everything may be 100 miles different from what I actually have envisioned right now.
Makes sense.
Absolutely, yeah. But how do you guys feel about a player versus player game? Because I know that in a traditional role-playing game, doing a play-by-post, you're collaborating to make a story together, whereas in this, you're competing. So, I wonder if that'll present problems as well.
I'm not sure that's one of the main reasons I require it to be rolled in their chat. Like each post, because if somebody sees, oh well, he rolled a 4, I'm going to say that I rolled a 5. So that I don't lose. Which is, like I said, is the main reason I wanted it to be rolled in the chat, so that Avery doesn't lie to us and tell us that we rolled a 6 whenever we actually rolled a 3 or something.
I guess
that makes sense.
Yeah, and if you could get enough players eventually, once you have things more ironed out, I guess you could do like tag teams or crews for the wrestlers. So like instead of a party, you have a crew. That'd be pretty cool.
I'm hoping anyway. We'll see how popular it gets. If nothing else, I've had fun looking at it anyway.
Yeah, man, absolutely.
I just know there's a lot of blind people that like wrestling for some odd reason, and I can't figure that aspect of it out.
I mean, the best part of wrestling is the actual narration, and like it's all talked about. So
yeah, and I'm going to try to be like Jim Ross or something, except not nearly as freaking cool.
Not going to be Rowdy Piper.
Oh no! Because once you think you've got all the answers, I change all the damn questions.
So when are you looking to get this going then, Richard?
Tentatively right now, the first televised, and I use that in quotation marks as well, is April the 21st.
Awesome. Okay, then. So
time to read over the step-by-step instructions, which I've linked to, the blank character sheet, which I've linked to as well, and read over it, develop a character, any questions, and hopefully get things started. And I also recorded the how-to podcast that I think I sent to you. I'm not sure now that I think about it.
I'm sure you have. It'll be up. It'll be up this week, guys. But if someone wants to get in on the action, do they just tag you at Unknown's DM in the Discord?
You can do that. I've had people email me on Discord. I've had people email me like my actual email address, which is DaleJr.fan83@gmail.com. And I believe as of right now, everybody has access to the KWF channel, which you can get to, or KWF category, which is you can get to with the $ KWF.
Awesome. So, Matt, I've got questions for you this week. Interrogation questions, but are there any topics that you wanted to cover this week while you're on?
I mean, nothing in particular. Most of my life right now is taken up with preparing for a miniatures game called Stargrave. It's coming out at the end of April.
The sequel to Frostgrave.
Yeah, it's kind of like it's reskinned, but it's also got some fundamental changes to the way it operates. And then I'm also doing, now that my computer situation has been fixed, prepping for an end of April start for what I hope to be an ongoing Dungeon World campaign, a bit more serious than my last one, with sound effects and a bunch of other stuff, provided I can get the Hydrobot to work with with our Discord server here.
Absolutely, yeah. I've looked up about Hydrobot. It's pretty cool, man.
Yeah.
But yeah, I wanted to ask you about tabletop games because, as I shared in the Discord, I used to play them and then obviously fell out because of my vision loss. And then I've heard a few people in the Discord talking about playing it despite their visual impairment. So, would you be able to talk through how you approach tabletop gaming as a visually impaired person?
Sure. So I'm assuming you're talking about tabletop miniatures games, right?
That's right.
Yeah. So, I guess in the early 1970s, 80s, there weren't. I mean, there were lots of games there are a bunch of different types of games, and it's probably easier to talk about them in different ways because they all require a slightly different approach. There's historicals, which are usually you have stands of figures, and they're usually in the 15, maybe even smaller millimeter range, which means they're a quarter of an inch, half of an inch high, and you have a bunch of guys that are on basically squares of plastic, and they have stats for them. You're attempting in most cases to be as close to historically accurate as possible. Like a friend of mine and I play Flames of War and a couple of other games like that, and the models are as close to the actual historical World War II model, figures or vehicles or what have you, and the rules attempt to replicate it. Which means that, for example, my early war French, which did not do so well against the Germans in the beginning of the war, as we all know. I have they accurately represent the failings of French battle theory at that point and design. And that means that my opponent, who enjoys playing the highly mechanized Germans, ends up with a significant advantage at some points, unless I can find a way to make him play into my strengths. And it's great, but the point in a lot of these cases is not who's the better player. It's not a competitive thing, although that's fun. It's also you're picking a side, you're rooting for it, you just enjoy the history, and there's a way to vest in it. It's also weird in that, as a player, a lot of your interest is outside of I've vested my entire life into this whole backstory of the Space Marine chapter or what have you, or Little Warband. I wasn't alive for World War II. My grandfather was, but you get to do a whole bunch of research into things that actually happened. So you're delving into an entirely non-fiction based world but you're using a fictional overlay to make it work.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's more like model railroading in some cases. And then there's what I would call skirmish games. Call it 15 models or less. It's usually closer to 10 or less. you're usually playing a very small little band of guys. You can see them like Necromunda's one. I think War Machine used to be. There are a couple of different games like this, and they're really fun because you only have to deal with a couple of models. They're easy for someone who's visually impaired. They're easy to manage because you're only moving a couple things per turn. Models don't tend to get in each other's way as much. Up from it, you have what I would call like the detachment or platoon-based combat, which is where I think Warhammer 40,000 and War Machine and a couple of other more popular games tend to fall. They're the things where you end up with like 50-ish in a standard 50 to 300 is where that falls. I know that sounds like a big range, but they usually have forces that are more elite, and they have forces that are what summon the horde. And they're all useful in different ways, but obviously the model range you can have on a board varies. And the board varies. Like for Frostgrave, which is a skirmish type game, definitely a skirmish. The maximum you're going to have per side is like 12, maybe 13 or 14 in an extreme situation. The board is 3 by 3 feet. Yeah, it's very small. Whereas when I was playing 40K, which is where I started out, which is a sci-fi game put out by Games Workshop, it's probably one of the most iconic for good and ill, good and bad. That's a 6 by 4 board, 6 foot by 4 foot, as opposed to 3 foot by 3 foot. I mean that distinction does make a difference. You need more space in a bigger game. So
plus the Frostgrave would definitely appeal to anyone who's listening that plays D&D, because it uses a D20, you add modifiers, the main character's a wizard with spells, and it seems very familiar to anyone that's played D&D, and a good sort of bridge over to tabletop miniature war games.
Yeah, and I think the next class of games I would talk about are what I would call, it's sort of, you remember how I said like they have the historicals, which are usually much smaller scale. So the standard miniature I think most people think of is in the 28 to 32 millimeter range. It's what you see most often on boards. It's what a lot of the standard what I would call standard war games use. So, and the 15 millimeters ones, like, they're much smaller so that you can get more guys on the board and represent a much bigger battle in a much smaller space. And then in a lot of these games, you can go up to what I would call like the epic scale, which is all the way down to like 6 millimeters again. So you started at the historicals, which you're trying to get a certain number of accurately scaled vehicles and things on the board. Then you go up and up and up. And what you get to at the top end for me, which represents the other end of the bell curve, is just massive detachment level battles where like epic or things where the scale is so small that a single stand now represents a bunch of siege tanks or something like that. And at that point, you're talking at like an entirely different kind of battle. The individual detail is still fairly high, but I'm not. I mean, a Land Raider in Warhammer 40,000 feels to me like the size of a shoebox when it's deployed. Like it's a big piece of tech, and they have even bigger pieces. Like I had a Thunderhawk, which is their version of like a Hercules Starlifter. It's a military vehicle, an airplane at one point from Forge World, and it took up the top of an entire bureau. Like it wasn't. I bought it with the intent of playing with it. I don't know what I was thinking at the time, but probably because I'd never actually encountered one. But it's huge, and they all let you engage in different ways of the models. And I think when you were talking about like how does a blind person play with these things? It really depends on what kind of game you want to play. Some of them, like I've seen like HeroClix, like they're standard 28 millimeter things, but they have little dials in the bottom, and it's not worth it to me to learn what all the little readouts do because you change the dials based on the amount of damage you take.
Mm-hmm.
I'm all for memorization, but that's hard. But with 40K and a lot of other stuff, like the miniatures are all you really need to worry about. You'd have some record keeping, it's not a big deal. I got a product from a company called products for wargamers. It's a screw-together brass measuring stick, and it's textured. Each like 1 inch is smooth, and the next inch is kind of ribbed, so you can feel the difference. And I can adjust it to certain lengths. And if I know one of my figures is going to move 6 inches, I just have one that's worth 6 inches, and I can generally move them. It's not a big deal.
That's fantastic.
So,
but how about the miniatures themselves in terms of painting them? I know you could just use them as standard plastic, but I assume you spray or decorate them in some way.
Nope, I don't. I pay someone else to do that. All of it. I mean, that's honestly been. You want to talk about a limiting factor in miniature games as I've gotten older. So this is what. Okay, I'm just going to step up on a soapbox here for a second. I apologize to anyone involved in the miniature community. Step back. Put your face shield on.
I'm backing up.
So I think one of the things that's happened for me as a visually impaired person, I'm sure a lot of people in the VI community can appreciate this, is I have to touch everything to figure out where it is. And in a miniature game, when I first started play, I had slightly better vision. I had hand-eye coordination of some kind because I could coordinate between my hand and eye use. And the miniatures at that point were often one piece. They were cast from plastic or metal, pewter, or what have you. And in the scale that I dealt with, for the most part, models, the casting was fine. There was some detail, but they were relatively durable. There weren't. You could put things like banners or antennae on some of them, but you didn't have a lot of what I would. The models were kind of chunky, I guess is the best way to think about it. They were solid pieces, and there were some armies and things that had very delicate construction or were built in weird ways, and you could model them always in less delicate ways. But if I touched a model, it wasn't going to be a big deal. As I've gotten, over the last, I would say 15 years, models casting, the technology behind it, and resin and a lot of other things has become more detailed. And it's allowed companies to make really gorgeous pieces. But it's also meant that manufacturers make a lot of models that I don't understand how people play with them or transport them, because they have tons of delicate little bits. The slightest pressure off to one side will knock them over. They're very imbalanced in a lot of cases. I remember one privateer press model where it was like 3/4 of a pound of metal balanced on essentially a pinhead. I'm not joking. It was like that fine. And I'm like, if you touch the model wrong, the whole thing fell apart. Now you could drill that out and put like a big nail through the center of it and pin it. But it was a lot of constructive work that I had to ask other people to do. So
it's tough, man.
It's become, as I've gotten, as I've played more games, another thing that's happened is people have demanded more and more precision in gameplay. Not necessarily in the games themselves, but competitive play, which is what I used to do. I used to go to tournaments. You have more delicate models, and the difference between 1/4 inch and 1/2 inch is important to a lot of people in these types of games, where they're doing a lot of prep and theory work in advance, like which build counters this build, points value, how do I build this army or component build in such a way that makes sense. And I will say that the biggest challenge I've run into is the game has become less accessible by the means required to interact with them. If you want to play at the high end scale games with the big, the big competitive pieces. And after a while, it just wasn't fun for me. If I touched a model wrong, they broke. And who wants my own models? It's one thing, but if I have to touch my opponent's models, and I would feel kind of uncomfortable with that. And
People
some random blind guys,
about fucking up their paint job or messing with their models. People don't want you touching them a lot of the time, right?
And if you're buying them from retail, I know a lot of these. People say, well, they're very affordable now. I'm like, I don't know where you're buying them from, but if you're doing a full service army, I don't see the point in buying in cheap and doing half. I don't like doing half measures, so I'll go all the way. And it's expensive. It's $1,000 in a lot of cases to buy into some of these games at the big scale. like the big retail
Yeah.
leaders anyway. And what I've done,
get Warhammer 40k army, like you were saying earlier.
yeah, and I mean, privateer press is the same way. I mean, I'm not saying the models aren't worth it. I'm just saying that like the cost benefit ratio, the calculation has changed for me in a lot of ways. And then that doesn't include me paying someone else to assemble and paint it. I had a really bad experience. Well, it was good and bad. It was bad in that I bought a very large Adeptus Custodes army and sent it to a professional painter and assembler. And my general instructions run something like this: I need you to make it so that this is 5 times stronger than you would normally expect it to need to be, and I need you to double that. And then I need you to paint and assemble it this way. And and typically that used to work, but the army I'd picked is largely resin, a lot of fine bits and pieces, and it just didn't travel well. And I got it back in the mail, and like I'd say like 30 to 60% of it, depending on which part you were looking at, was just bits were broken off. It was just shattered. And it took something out of me. I'd spent a lot of money on it. It was one of my things just before, like the year before COVID hit. I was like, I was going to get back into 40K. I was going to get playing again. And I sent it back, and the guy rebuilt it and came back. And this time it was like 20%, but it was still, I mean, it just didn't work out for me. And what I ended up doing instead was I changed over to Frostgrave and a couple other games that I could play with a friend in our, in the back room, not in a big gaming store. He has a 3D printer, and the games that we play by Kevin McCullough, Frostgrave, recently Rangers of Shadowdeep, which isn't even a competitive miniatures game, in that it's a cooperative role-playing game where you play against scenario. You're not playing against your friends; you're playing with them in a lot of cases.
Well, I have a few questions, if you don't mind. Jump in.
Go for
it. With like so to go on about, you were talking about compare, play, and Richard, when someone plays one of these bigger games, they literally plan each individual miniature and the most they can get out of it. And to be honest with you, like Warhammer, for example, seems like a random game where you roll dice, but really the odds aren't that great because you're using a d6 and you can pretty much plan out what's going to happen with your units depending on the dice roll, whereas something like Frostgrave, it is far less accurate and I imagine gets a lot more casual play. When I used to play tabletop war games, we had the same people that were in D&D at the time, which was a lot of rules Nazis, and it seems like D&D people are a lot more casual now, and games like Frostgrave, Stargrave, Rangers of Shadowdeep are accommodating that. Do you feel that's the case?
I mean, so I think what it is that when you and I were playing early on, there weren't that many options for really competitive play, like serious, what I would call competition, in miniatures. And if you wanted to throw down in the squared circle, and you wanted to see who was best, you wanted to pay $50 to go in. You had either done it yourself or paid someone else to assemble and paint a bunch of models, and you were given a random scenario, and it was your brain versus the other person's brain, and the dice were the mitigating factor. You didn't have that many choices. And I think what's happened is that the games themselves have changed. Like 40K now is not what 40K used to be.
Yeah.
It's there's an entire company and an entire private, like Games Workshop has basically outsourced their entire competitive, not outsourced, but they've allowed the community to develop tournament standards and game league play and rules and missions. And is it Battle? No, it's not Battlefront. One of the no, it's a company out in California that does their that is basically, there was a need for a tournament set of rules, and they solicited community input and have essentially become one of the standards for community tournament play. And it's very precise. The 40K system itself, the rules there are different rules in 40K now. There's what I would call like open rules, which are like just bring whatever you want to the table and play. There's what I would call casual rules, where they're like force points. Just play a Terminator, equip them whatever you want, and they're worth this many force points. And then there's what I would call competitive play, which is every single thing is points valued.
Yeah.
And there's yearly erratas. Like the Games Workshop in general has tried to allow people to play their games in different ways, which I think is awesome. But that's definitely not the vibe I used to get from them. There's one way to play. This is the correct way to play. And thou shalt, you can do whatever you want, but this is the way we generally endorse it. And I think places like you said, like Kevin McCullough, like Frostgrave, and some of the other places have found, like, look, we know people want to have a somewhat competitive experience, but we know they also want to be able to have a drink while they do it. And it means that we're going to have a consistent rule set that's a little bit simpler. It's a little bit more internally consistent, and you can use whatever models you want and just go in and play for the experience. I think a lot of people resonate to that, especially people in my age group. Like, I really just want to pull out a glass of bourbon and see what my models do for the day. If I win, it's great. But like, I'm going to win either way. If I have a really horrible day and I can brag about it later, I've still won.
Yeah, I get the impression from Frostgrave is it's a game, I'm going to jump into after the pandemic, is that the RNG in that one is part of the fun, that the randomness, that something bad can happen, a monster can show up, or things can go really wrong for you is part of the experience, rather than 40K where people seem to punish themselves. Unless they're playing orcs, they punish themselves over fucking things up.
Yeah, but I think that the difference is that in 40K, you can literally roll hundreds of dice at a time. And if the dice really skew, you can be in a really bad place. Like, it takes 1 or 2 rounds of horrifically bad rolls. And if you're playing a competitive game, remember, I mentioned this before, like you'd said at the beginning of this session too, where we'd talked about how people, the longer the game goes, the more you value the experience based on the outcome.
Mm.
It's just how it tends to work, I think, when you're looking at it from that perspective. And in that case, if you lose the game in the first 30 minutes because of a couple bad rolls, and you spend the next 2 hours playing out how badly you've lost, it's deeply frustrating for the player.
That's when the bourbon comes in handy.
Yeah, no, I agree. Well, bourbon's always handy, in my opinion, but that's a different story. But I think also part of that is, like, when you're valuing it based on one outcome or another, what Games Workshop decided to do is add in a bunch of abilities that you could play at different times based on the size and composition of your forces, and you could spend those points to generate special tactics or effects, thematic things that your army could do. And you can offset bad die rolling or improve good die rolling or change your army composition as a result of that. But it does mean that army building becomes a sort of a competitive sport. Not that it wasn't before, but the thing about Frostgrave is you can have good and bad times, but the rolls are so fast, and you know what you're getting into with Frostgrave. Like, you can plan for it. There aren't that many variables. You're going to have some crappy consecutive die rolls. It's going to happen, but it's that randomness. You're right, is good, but it's also nice not to know, like, you're not, you know what the mission is, but you don't know how that mission is going to play out. Like, each round you roll for initiative. So if I do something that sets me up for the next turn, I have to think about what happens if I go first or my opponent goes first the next turn. And
I feel like there's a lot more variables. I played Mordheim back in the day, which was an old Games Workshop skirmishing game using the Warhammer Fantasy system, and I felt that it was pretty bland, really. And then reading through Frostgrave, I'm like, man, there's much more variation to this. I know that your warband is led by a wizard that sort of dictates the way you approach. Are you talking about the command points in Warhammer 40K? The wizard is sort of like your defines the tactics that you may use, it appears, and then your warband is sort of backing them up.
Yeah, and in Privateer Press's War Machine game, your warcaster performs a very similar role. The difference is that the place that I think Frostgrave and Rangers of Shadowdeep and Stargrave, from everything I've seen, really shine is you can do something. They're really intended to do something that a lot of these other games are not, and that is they're not. They are episodic, but they're designed for you to be able to grow and like tell a story over time. Like he has a lot of rules in Frostgrave that let you play campaign based or league based play.
Yeah.
You play through a series of, and like you in Frostgrave, you build up your base. There are different kinds of bases. You can spend stuff on magic items. You have experience to level your wizard. Your apprentice levels is a byproduct of that. You can buy different kinds of followers. There are different benefits for different campaign settings. And I find that I'm far more vested in the outcome of these types of things, even though they're like, relatively short games. Like I'm very interested in what's going to happen with my 8 to 12 guys.
Yeah.
It's fun. It's like I feel like there's a bit of me out there, and yet I'm not like my friend of mine just 3D prints the models. At one point, I was using Magic the Gathering, like that board game that they had for a while. It came with a whole just like stack of miniatures. Never used anything with the actual game itself, but I was using the figures, the pre-printed miniatures that came with it as my warband. And it's super fun because like it's like you said, it's role playing. You can build a character, you can min-max. Like, what am I going to do 3 sessions from now? What happens if I grow 3 levels? Where do I put these points?
Yeah.
Which guys am I going to advance? Which spells? I mean, he had it's like 64 spells, 80 spells, something like that in the game, and they're all useful in different ways now in Frostgrave 2. So I'm like, do I buy a new spell? Do I focus? Do I concentrate on my current strengths?
It's
focus?
It's like D&D in a lot of ways. But one question I had for you, that's something that I'll be approaching once it's safe to meet up in person, is I'm a pretty confident person, and so I've no problem going out to play games with people and being like, hey man, my eyes don't work properly, so you'll have to cut me some slack. But in your experience, what advice would you give to people who are pretty nervous, that aren't that confident? They're like, this sounds fun, like Frostgrave or Warhammer sounds like a ton of fun, but I'm nervous about trying to compete with strangers who I think might judge me. And that's also something that was an issue for D&D, and I know Knights of the Braille has helped that, but this is definitely a game where you have to play with a bunch of different people and sort of put yourself out there with your vision loss.
Yeah, I mean, it's so...
my answer, but I'll let you tell him.
Yeah, I mean, there's not a... I mean, go ahead, Richard. I need to rephrase how I'm going to give my answer anyway.
That's when you wear drawstring shorts, and be sure that you can flip the middle finger, and if they have a problem with it, drop the shorts, flip the finger, and haul ass out of there. And not into a wall, hopefully.
I mean,
good point. I'm out of here.
See ya.
And then you run into the wall. Like, can somebody please help me leave?
I'm still mad at you, but help.
Go ahead, Matthew.
I was gonna say, like, I think it's important, if you're worried about going out and playing a communal game and you want to do it, but you're afraid of other people, or you're afraid of the potential thing that might happen. I fully understand that. I was very fortunate in that I got started with miniatures and gaming by association. I ran into people randomly who were doing things, and I asked questions, and I didn't originally want to play. I was just curious about the random things that were happening around me. And it turned out that those people were looking for new members at the time, or people to play with, and they were more than happy to reach out and help me join in. And after a while, I became one of the more interested and more enthusiastic players in the general community. If you were going to go out and you're worried about how people are going to perceive you or what it's going to be like, rejection is possible, But most people, like, you can't play these games by yourself.
Yeah.
Everybody is obligated. Like, you can't play D&D on your own, really. I mean, Frostgrave and a couple. So first of all, Frostgrave and Rangers of Shadow Deep, they have solo play options. You can play them alone without anybody around you. If you want to like test it out, see how it works, read through it, do it on your own first. Find a way to like proxy a couple of models and play the game out and get some experience up. And what I would do is go out and say, hey, go to the local store owner, and because you're going to need a forum to play, or find a local board if you're on. I'm not in social media, but if you want to go that route, go on Facebook or find a place like Knights of the Braille or some other place comparable on Discord, or find a community where you can engage and say, hey, I want to do this thing. How are people in my community doing it? And have someone who's more experienced try and connect you and say, look, I just want to play. I want to learn. Uh, I'm okay losing. That's one of the things I would say is, first of all, don't have, as much as I say, like, value the outcome based on the time spent, be okay learning by getting your butt kicked. Have someone teach you, and just reach out and say, look, I just want to have fun. Show me how this game runs, and make your own choices.
Yeah, absolutely. I think
I
people are a little more accepting now than in the past. It was kind of difficult to approach things in the past because people didn't know how to deal with people with disabilities in a lot of ways. But due to exposure and the internet and lots of other things, it seems like people are far more empathetic to other people's issues rather than questioning the validity of them, but rather, how can I help?
Yeah, the two caveats I put to that are: come to the table with solutions, not problems. Don't say, "Hey, I'm blind. How are you going to fix this for me?" Have an answer. Like, I'm blind. Here's how I solve these problems, which are probably your obvious objections. Let's have a good game.
Yeah, absolutely,
Don't.
man. I see
Yeah.
that a lot with people in our community. Is I can't do that, and it's like that's fine if you need us to make changes, but you do need to find solutions. Unfortunately, everything's not accessible, and we have to find workarounds where we can. And then you can protest and say to the company, "Hey guys, your miniatures suck because they fall apart when I grab them." But as you say, at the same time, they're not. We have to make our own workarounds as well.
Yeah, and I think my answer to that was, those companies don't get my money anymore. Like, I love Games Workshop dearly, but and Privateer Press, but they've built games that I can't play.
Yeah.
Or the amount of effort I would have to go, assuming we had a community and we weren't in the middle of COVID, the amount of effort I would have to go through to play at the level I would find enjoyable would greatly exceed the amount of time and money it would take to do so. And there would be a lot of risk to the models and components I was playing with. And my answer has been, I go out and I play with Legos or other models and have a glass of bourbon, and I'm very fortunate that I have a couple of friends that I can sit down in their basement and we can do that, or in my my over my kitchen table. If you don't have that, then I the other. What I mean by that is, pick something that you can do, find a solution, ask for help for solutions before you get to the table, figure it out, and realize that there are also dickheads out there as well that play a lot of these games. And in real life, you're going to run into them as well. So figure out what you're comfortable with and draw your own lines. And don't value yourself based on the outcome, but just say, hey, this didn't go the way I wanted to. Like, I didn't play competitive Magic per se, but I played. A friend of mine liked to play Two-Headed Giant, which is a game where two people play against two people essentially. And he loved having me around as a partner because he wanted to make all the choices anyway. So I became a proxy hand for him, a replacement for his other player. And I had fun just sitting down and spending time with him because it's the only time I got to see him. And it was scenarios where it worked really well for me. But I realized after the fact, like, you can do some things to make Magic accessible. I can see putting some like some barcodes on cards or some like the way around like the NFC type electronic chips where you can label and read them with your phone. Like there are ways to do all that stuff.
I have a friend that makes his own sleeves for the cards, and he plays comparatively. I think it was at a tournament in Amsterdam before lockdown. But he was saying as well that they have made a thing on the iPhone where it creates a visual for the picture on the card, and that it's moving towards a system where you'll be able to read the stuff. Because a lot of people talk about these third-party apps and games for, Magic or Games Workshop, and people have pointed out that why don't they make all this stuff virtual? Why don't they make it in a virtual accessible way? And people have said, look, they're not going to hand their game to a third party. If they're going to make an app where you can play their game, then they're going to want to own that entirely. So that, I think that's the problem, is that there is an option there for accessibility in terms of application, but it's down to money, really.
Yeah, and I think that was the third. I think I said 2, but let's make it 3 points. Is pick a game that you have a reasonable chance of being successful at and enjoying. I mean, there are lots of games out there now. It's not like when I started with miniatures and your choices were historicals or Warhammer 40,000 or Warhammer, like a Games Workshop product. That's pretty much all I could find at my store. I mean, there were other games out there. There's Infinity, Malifaux. I'm just naming random games that I've discovered since then. Like there's lots of stuff out there. I tried Magic for a while. I loved playing Magic casually, but I couldn't find a local community to play, so I ended up selling my collection. Worked really well. But it's I started playing Dominion, and it turns out there's a company, 64-ounce Games, which sells Braille labels and options for, and we have at least 5,000 Dominion cards. And it's fun. We don't play as much as we used to, but it's out there. There are other games too where it's not worth it for me to make it accessible. My friends don't mind reading, and it all works out. Like I'm going to play Pathfinder the Adventure card game later today with friends, and my cards aren't labeled. I just memorize what I can, and we sit back and we play. And it's like D&D, but without the role play. Kill shit, get shit, loot shit.
Well,
I like it.
we've gone on another long podcast with Matt, and we'd like to have you back again, man, because I still got like 100 different questions for you. But
Not really, man. I'm tired of you already, but but yeah, I mean, I agree with Jim.
I'd be tired of you too, Richard, but you don't talk during these things, so it's not a big deal.
Well, it's because y'all are so much smarter than me, and I'm learning.
Oh, shut up.
I mean, I've never played the 40K. I've heard a little bit about it and the miniatures game that y'all was talking about. So I mean, I had nothing to contribute other than, well, what's that? What's that? And I figured everybody would get tired of me saying, well, what's that? And what's that? So I mean, I'm sitting back listening and learning, just like the last podcast, But,
I think you love the idea of Frostgrave, Richard.
well, I was thinking about that, and then the what do you call it? The Rangers of Shadow Deep.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm definitely gonna look up those, and I'm gonna need y'all to email me because I've already forgotten the name of the book that Matt mentioned. Only one I can find was like Hero of the Halfling or something like that.
Yeah, I think it's like Small Magic or something like that is one.
But I found it on Audible, so if you can remember it, please PM me on Discord with it.
I'll put it in.
Because I would love to check it out. But I agree with Jim. Like I said, would really love to have you back. Because I'm learning a lot.
Yeah,
I mean, Rangers of Shadow Deep is an outstanding game. I recommend it to anybody who you are playing a role-playing game. Like you build a hero, and he has some companions, and depending on how many people you play with, you have anywhere from 7 to 1 other companions, and you have points to buy them. And you have standard equipment which you select for the mission, and you go out and you try and save. You save a community, and then you play another game after that, and you gain experience based on what you accomplish. And
Okay.
it's a game where you're playing. You can have a spellcaster, you can have a non-spellcaster, you have heroic abilities. It's totally doable as a single player game or as a multiplayer game.
Yeah, I'm definitely gonna check that out. Jim, do we have to let Jesse in on this? I mean, do we have to tell him about it?
No, absolutely
Okay,
not.
good,
But
good.
before we close out today, one last thing for you, Matthew, to
Sure.
boggle your brain. What books are you reading at the moment?
Right now, I'm reading the latest book by James Cyrus Baldwin in his Dragon Rider series. And I cannot remember the name of it because I jumped right into it. I just finished rereading for the second time a book by Will White called Winter Steel. It's a cultivation series. It's really good. It's all these are on Audible. In preparation for him coming out with Bloodline here in April. I have just finished Street Cultivation 3 by Sarah Lynn, which is in a series. It's another cultivation book. It's also on Audible. A lot of these are narrated by Travis Baldry. I just finished book 1 in the Unbound Deathlord series by Edward Castle. It was called Challenge, and I'm into book 2, which is Obliteration, and we have Corruption here, but I haven't gotten to it yet. It just came out. Real interesting set there. I need to reread book 3 in Tao Wong's series, Cultivation series, and that the most recent one was what was it? It was the Second Expedition, because the next book in the series is coming out in June, and I just finished his book Stars Asunder in his System Apocalypse series, which is a lit RPG book series, a really good one. And Broken Council is coming out in Audible very soon, and I want to prepare for that. So
when you say cultivation series, what do you mean by that, Matt?
So cultivation is the Eastern mysticism concept of you cycling energy through your body, creating a central core, and advancing yourself by purifying your body and your mind, and developing techniques like throwing fire or sensing other people or walking on water, crouching tiger, hidden dragon stuff.
Richard,
And
purifying your body means not going to Red Lobster, so that's out of the question for you.
well, this is why I read about other people doing it. So unless I can do some drunken kung fu stuff, I don't think I'm going to be a good cultivator. But they're very different series. There's also I'm basically reading a lot of lit RPG and cultivation right now. It's most of my life. I just finished Dangerous Playmates, and I think it's Outcast Barbarian by Aaron Crash. There's some adult material in that collection, but it's a bunch of potential and monster girl. They have some harem stuff, some very adult lit RPG or things. There was we finished this most recent Sibelius book a while back. What else is in there? I think those are the big ones that I've been reading.
I just started reading about the lit RPG genre. Some guy that sort of kicked off the modern era of lit RPGs, but I really don't know much about them. Like, is it more heavily influenced by Dungeons and Dragons? Is that the idea?
So there are a lot of different kinds of lit RPG books. There's some that have that attempt to enter the genre, I think, just to sort of profit from it, and there are some that are more unique in the way they approach it. What I would say is a lit RPG is the concept of gamifying a fantasy or an environmental experience. So in a lot of ways, it's video game based, where like you pick things at different levels. Oh, that's right. We also just finished the latest Bad Guys book by Eric Ugland. If you want a D&D based book that's really good, Eric Ugland's Good Guy and Bad Guy series are really quite good. Very humorous. The audible narration on them are fantastic. I need to. I'm probably, but the lit RPG concept is like for example, System Apocalypse is the idea that mana, the one by Tao Wong, is that mana saturated our world as a part of a larger cosmic expansion of the system. And when it came to fruition, everybody got a character sheet. And that our world was a dumping ground for leftover mana from the rest of the universe, and that we were scheduled for colonization by a bunch of fantasy races. And you get things like tech and magic interacting, but everyone has points and skills, as in like use skills or superpowers essentially, and then you have but everything's rated. Like you have attributes, and it's like, what happens if real people get thrown into a dungeon world unexpectedly? Like you're walking down the street with your iPhone and a Starbucks, and suddenly monsters start appearing all around you.
I just
What
hide in my
happens?
basement, never come out again. Doesn't
Yeah.
matter
I
if
mean,
it's my character sheet.
I think a lot of people in the United States or around the world would be like, I grab a 12 gauge and I get me some dragon meat.
Are you talking about my family like this?
I'm talking about me, man.
Oh, okay, hated them. Dragon meat, you know.
Damn straight, man. That's what they got Sawzall for.
Oh,
Mate,
exactly.
yeah, man.
They
Richard,
start a trilogy I got on Audible called The Fate of Wizardom. It's a box long. Got it for 1 credit because I'm a
Oh,
cheap ass.
awesome.
Fell in love with it immediately. Not R.A. Salvatore good, or R.A. Salvatore, however you say his name. But still really good at the same time. I'm really enjoying it. The narrator is fantastic.
Awesome, man. I have not been reading anything, been so busy at work, but hoping to start walking for part of my commute again, listening to some audiobooks and get back into them. I've got a million recommendations from all the folks on Nights at the Braille here. So
That's why you don't listen to them. You just say, yeah, I'll put that on my list, and you never.
there's so many good books out there. It's so difficult to dedicate to one thing. But one thing I will brush aside that Richard will probably hate me for is Brandon Sanderson, man. I just can't get into it, dude.
Me either.
My wife loves his work. She's actually met him at a con a while back. Got an audio autograph from him. She backed one of his Kickstarters recently that had a bunch of specific dice. I mean, I like some of Sanderson's work is really, really intriguing. He does go on and on, so at certain points.
Yeah.
If you haven't read them, there are a couple of his series that there's one book in the beginning that I think is really good. It's called Legion. I like a lot of his beginning series in what is the Rectifiers or Justifiers.
I think I've read a couple of his, and I just couldn't get into them.
Yeah, it depends on really what you're trying to get out of what he's writing. He did write the last 3 books in the Wheel of Time series from Robert Jordan, and he did a fantastic job.
I heard that he basically was influenced so heavily that the wife of the author took him on to do that. And there's no denying that, he's obviously a very talented writer, good at world building, good at character development. But yeah, it's even the Wheel of Time stuff can be a little slow at times, but it's still faster than a lot of Sanderson's stuff. He really does drag it out sometimes.
Yeah, he has, what is it, 2 other people that I enjoyed from him were that I think were influenced by him. Django Wexler does a really good large scale sort of Napoleonic battle series. I found interesting. And what was the other guy who did the Powder Mage trilogy? Brian McClellan was also, I think, influenced by him to some degree. And if you want some really interesting fantasy pieces, those 2 authors are, especially Brian McClellan's first series and Django Wexler's first series, are both really worth looking at.
I do have the powder mage on my wish list. It's like way down at the bottom so far.
Dude, move it up, man. The first one in the series. It's one of the primary focuses of the setting is that there are mages. There are regular mages, and then there are mages that do things with gunpowder by consuming it. They enhance their senses. They can move bullets around in different ways, and they literally consume gunpowder, like black powder, not like modern powder.
Oh yeah.
Real.
Snorting it like cocaine. Is that how it goes?
Yeah, that's exactly. No, literally, that's how some of them do it.
Oh my god.
That's getting added into the Rhyme of the Frost Maiden.
Yeah, so
get your snort.
boom.
Yeah.
Totally worth looking at. So yeah, I'm if you haven't checked those out, I have a ton of reading to do. And if you want to check out Cultivation, the first book I recommend is Will White's Cradle series. The first one is Unsold, and it's an outstanding series with some Travis Baldry does some great narration. Especially once you get to Ghostwater, the whole series just takes off, and I can't stop reading.
Awesome, man. You've now added more to my Audible list, but you've absolutely full of knowledge, Matt, and it's awesome having you on the podcast. We definitely have you back whenever you have time, man.
Let me know. Not doing anything for the foreseeable future. I'm locked inside my apartment with a couple of exceptions. So it's always nice to talk to you guys, even you, Richard.
Always. Yeah, nobody likes. I don't even like talking to myself. So
I love talking to myself.
I don't, because I'm always arguing with myself.
Aww.
And the fact is, I never win them either. But
darn.
But yeah, if you would, please do send me a list of those recommendations so I can add like books 1,000 to 1,185 on my wish list.
Yeah, I mean,
I do love trying new stuff like that. So
I'll drop it into the chat, into the general chat. I'm sure other people would benefit from it. And particularly, I'll reference the Andrew Seipel series. And you can take a look at his stuff. That's another lit RPG one. He actually has an RPG based off his off of that. So it's something else you can look up in your spare time.
All right, and for everybody, including you, Matt, be sure to tag me if you want me to see something because I get a lot of notifications. So I would appreciate it. And with that, Jim, are we done? And should we let Matthew close us out?
Yes, mate.
All right, Matthew, close us out, sir.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Knights of the Braille. And remember, in the very, very near future, you should be watching for games, including the Knights Wrestling Federation. So, if you want to play, join Knights of the Braille. If you are ready to rumble!
Excellent. And we'll catch you next week.